Hi and welcome to the Improvisors podcast. I'm Neil Thomas and this is my co-host, Kevin James.
Thank you, Neil. And in this podcast series, we interview improvisers about their histories, their practices, and their aspirations.
Today, it gives us great pleasure to be in conversation with DURE DARA, widely accomplished, groundbreaking, engaged activist. We talk with her about improvisation, of course. We talk about the unexpected joys of deconstructing a hotel room as an art form. We talk about Gough Whitlam and the arts and the sonic pleasures of playing cowbell and beer keg.
We also spoke about the importance of rigor and about gratitude, courage, fear, and found objects.
We hope you enjoy this episode of the Improvisers podcast as much as we did. Good morning, DURE DARA. Thank you so much for being here with Kevin and myself today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Perhaps you could address the question, improvisation in your life. I was going to step right in there with a really bold, big question, because I know you're a big and bold person. So give it to us.
Well, I'm much shyer than you think, but improvisation was a process of relating in music that was a liberation and incredibly good for my well-being. When I'm being flippant, I say, when people say, why are you still improvising? I say, because I'd probably be killing people if I didn't do that. It's so good for my well-being. And it came to me as a gift. I was invited. I had been listening to a band, a modern jazz band, led by Brian Brown, who was an architect and a composer and a horn player. And he joined with a man that I had joined with called David Tolley, and we were friends at that time. And I used to visit them when they played. I used to go and listen to all their music because I'd grown up in a family where everybody sang or fought. There was no in-betweens. And so I heard all the jazz, all the vocalists in the world that were wonderful, especially American singers, of course. And they were singing the black man's song anyway. You know, their moan was always, jazz has always been the black man's cry. And when I came to Australia and I met up with musicians and went to listen to music, I realized that it meant a lot to me because at the age of 16, I was listening to Bill Evans and crying and thinking he had written things for me. So music was clearly, I'm an only child of separated parents, but in a big family that was verbose and mad and interesting at the same time. So music, when I went to listen to these people play with lovely women singers, just after folk music became, when there was Frank Trainor's Jazz Club and Margaret Rodenite and Judy Durham and all those were wonderful women who also were into poetry and music in a man's world. And I did not have a father, so I loved being in a band. And that band had Bob Setter Green and Brian Brown, David Tolley, who became my partner, and Ted Vining, who could play music on a cymbal to get the sound that black drummers gave. It was like lightning on the cymbal, and so I learned and enjoyed all this so much that Brian said to me one day, "I think you should be playing some bells because I can hear bells and butterflies in my head." So he gave me one cowbell, and from that one cowbell, I proceeded to collect sounds around me as if I was building a piano with many keys. And at that time, people thought it was eccentric and indulgent. But I was loving it because it was like having all the sounds that I wanted, from the kitchen knife on a string to a little bell or my cowbell. And so I gave myself the opportunity that Brian gave me. And my first concert was at Dallas Brooks Hall. That was a beautiful place to perform because we had great entrepreneurs at that time And the Whitlam government was in business. So they looked after the arts in a way that nobody else did. They supported progress. They didn't just give you money to play, they gave you money to rehearse. Well, for improvised music, the best thing you can do is to be involved in playing and knowing each other to develop a dialect or conversation. And so I developed a dialect with a group and learned how to take that dialect and communicate with other groups, and hence got to play at places like the Basement in Sydney that was packed out and loving it, not thinking it was eccentric, not thinking it was indulgent, not thinking we were on drugs, not thinking we were indulgent. So then that love and permission gave me a career where I was invited, and I often sometimes also said, would you play with me? And I joined with David, who was a wonderful bass player, who could sing with his bass, and had it, and started to want to use electronic music. And that's where we got into trouble with jazz, because the moldy old figs at the time thought that we shouldn't be using electronics. And so they asked David to leave. I mean, they didn't ask David to leave. It became difficult. That's not, yeah. They were always loving friends and still always will be. And we went out on our own and played in galleries, because David was a painter and a sculptor as well. And I loved being like a gypsy, going and playing in whatever environment. The Sculpture Centre in Sydney, the Adelaide Festival, where people threw tin cans at me, told me I was mad. The Conservatorium of Sydney, where the students got up and came and started playing my instruments while I was playing. So everything was a lovely new experience. Nothing offended me, because I'd been used to saying where was I from, and did we have snakes in the kitchen, and how did I learn to use toothpaste. That was all adventurous. My grandmother said, if they ask questions, they're interested. Do not be offended. But if they tell you who you are, then you can answer with whatever feeling came up. So when someone said, you're very clean for an Indian, I said, I'm actually used to running water. And I live in a house where I have the first bath because I'm paying for it, and 4 other people use it. So water is not an issue for me. So that's how I started to have an improvised life. But the 60s and the 70s and the 80s gave us a lot of room to think that we could do and say and have everything and what we liked. So I learned that there was discipline to come into that whole thing called life. So I learned better manners, whether they were table manners or food manners. It was all about connecting with other people. And then I realized how good it was for my well-being, and what a lovely diaspora of different kinds of musicians could communicate without all having to speak the same dialect. And so that's what I find improvisation gives, even if it's movement. Each race will bring a different movement to their arms and their hands and the ways they use their eyes. So improvised music became a language of my personal being the political. And being a feminist, the personal is political. I still have to believe that, because I could be very angry about the fact that there's no equity still. I could be very angry about the yes and no. I could be very angry and have a narrative of complaint. But in fact, improvisation has opened my brain to a country where we are not filled with the obligation of tradition that we have all lost. That's why we're here. We're here in this country because we didn't have a big tradition we came from that we could connect with here. So we are much more open-minded as people receiving this incredible landscape. And the landscape of people, look at the 3 of us now. We are so different backgrounds, but we share kind of language and a love. But I think it's actually a dialect, an intelligence kind of a dialect. I'm not good at deciding what it is because I'm not very scientific. But David started playing improvised music, and I did too, which was going to be our own song. So we went to places like La Mama, where there was safe refuge for Aboriginal people who wanted to be in theatre, for people like us who were gypsies. And of course, now, 60 years later, I'm talking to you about my work, which is now much more settled. And I've been very fortunate to meet Eugene Ugeti, who runs Speak Percussion. He said to me, he watches everything. He's a very astute, loving, and hardworking man. And this ensemble, this organization called Speak Percussion is full of people who play music, but also work with music. So it's very, very luxurious to be invited to be a resident creative director. But really, I feel like I'm the elder, and I don't want to use the word till they recognize the elders of this country. So we use the word as a resident person. And I use my skill as an improviser without having a specific role, like a kind of grandma in a house. And so the young musicians are very inspiring. And the young people who are both musicians and colleagues, just to provide an amazing framework for now doing some concerts with them at the end of the year to thank them for my honorarium in a way, and also to thank La Mama as these two symbols who come together to help us to celebrate that good things happen in the arts at a time when we feel very despondent.
Tell us, Dure, a little bit more, if you will, about your performative life, especially maybe the early days of breaking ground and maybe, as you implied, bumping up against, to some degree, some resistance and
sexism,
questions, but go forth.
Yeah, well, I just learned a way of coming together with people by listening to what they were really saying behind the words, and coming to understand that coming to know each other was the beginning of a contract between us about friendship and about respect and kindness. And I felt I was so fortunate to be living in situations where I had so many privileges, because everyday Australians were incredibly hospitable to me. I had to learn from that love and that from that permission. And then, of course, I went through a stage where I was bereaved about the fact that I didn't know any Aboriginal person. But the minute I realized that, I started working with an Aboriginal organization. So, it's about, they always say you read a book, you're ready for a book when you start to read it, and every time I had a big kind of change in my thinking, and I've done some good things and some questionable things, like we all have. And now I'm old enough now to be able to use it now to reflect for my personal. So it's a cyclic thing that if you play experimental music or you do modern dance, it's always going to give you a framework for processing. And so there's so many diasporas now. We've got, just in my diaspora with improvised music, we've got, experimental music, we've got sonic music, and we've got this and we've got that, and nothing's a limit. So next week, tomorrow, one of the things I noticed is that everybody's curating everything. Everybody's going to be a curator now. I'm very happy to be a participant. And so I've been curated with a Javanese girl. And I suddenly thought, wow, we can just use the fact that we're different but the same by doing something together, rather than to working it too much and worrying about the isms. And I'm finding that that's a bit tougher, but not bad, enjoyable. Now, I don't know whether I'm telling you what you need to know, but I'm just saying to you that I feel that being alive is just such a privilege. And I wish we were looking after the earth and each other more. But I feel that improvised music gives people a little bit more encouragement to be themselves. You know, a friend of mine just got a gig where he will be playing a solo for a woman who's in a wheelchair, and she's going to have an opportunity to get on the floor and dance, get out of her wheelchair. And that little session is a jewel of a story about what is capable if you go outside the square. And I used to think I was obliged to break the rules. And I used to say, you can break the rules if you understand the principles. But I don't think it's that easy. I think you have to break the rules with a lot of thought, but it's such a freedom. Because if you will break the rules, if you understand the principles, in other words, examine it. And people said they couldn't vote properly because they didn't understand. You know, you just have to examine for yourself. We know what we're doing. We know when we're doing things that are wrong and that are unfortunate. You can't keep saying all the time this narrative, I didn't know. You find out. You know, as Freud said, you look at love, you look at death, killing, and you look at ignorance. But don't spend too much time with ignorance. It's not a good companion.
I'm thrilled by what you're saying, and
well, I hope that I'm not pontificating. I want to simply share the privilege of having found a career that was gifted to me.
You're not pontificating. I think it's such a lovely thing for us to be able to listen to someone with such a life and such a wisdom and such a willingness and strength to present that wisdom. And there's such a thirst. There is such a thirst in our world, the arts and more, and people, everyone. As there is a thirst for wisdom that is given out respectfully and has the ring of truth. So thank you so much for.
So long as it's a ring, you know, I don't want it to be a great big bang or a great big intrusion. So yes, I accept that. But I think at my age, I have also to listen more. And that's what I'm much more quiet and shyer when I'm at work and when I am being asked a question. I think it's because I had a life where, because my parents didn't get it together, I, very young, far too young, decided that I knew everything, and I didn't. I had a narrative that covered all my pain. So I say openly to you, I'm humbled by this experience, because the voice, giving voice is a privilege, and you have to think about everything you say. And I've had a good time here, far too much. So I'm going to shut up now for a little while, and then you can decide if you want me to talk more about something or other.
We talked a little earlier off camera about, it intrigued me. You were talking a little bit about improvisation and life. I think you were saying that improvisation was a great thing to do, perhaps on stage or in a certain sphere. But improvisation in life itself could be a dangerous thing. Would you mind revisiting that ground?
I think I think that we haven't trained this brain that we don't know much about in lateral thinking. We think that when it's a bit hard, we just say we don't know. Whereas I think the challenge is that you should be able to say, I actually don't know, and can you help me? And I didn't do that as a child. I was precocious and I was naughty. And because they felt so sorry for me that I didn't have parents, they didn't just give me a good whack in the brain, you know, like talk to me and say, not good, naughty girl. And I realize now that if women who are still waiting for freedom, that's equity, millions of women go to bed last, eat last, never get asked, never get thanked. Millions, millions. And millions of girls are not allowed to look up at their father's eyes. Those women are filled with anger and resentment too, just as men do when they're told to go to war and they do the wrong things at war. How dare we do that to them? We need clay pigeons. There's a show coming up for spring Speak Percussion, where they are talking about clay pigeons who have been invented for people who need to shoot. We need to invent a thinking so we don't shoot. We need a clay pigeon for our drive because we're born with angst and we are born still wanting. And when you want, it's very hard because your desire has to fight with need, your conscious and your unconscious. So there's always the paradox going. This is very simple psychology. This is household, made up bullshit from reading. But what it shows me that struggle with me is actually a challenge for thinking better by saying, I don't know, or I need to find out. And never before has this country exposed itself as a racist country when it doesn't need to be, because people are better than that. They're just not being disciplined about thinking. And so it took me into a lot of study about being secular, because I love all the religions. I know about Jesus, Muhammad, of course, we've all read about all the religions. I had to face that I'm going to be like a butterfly or a moth, depending on how vain I feel at the time. And I'm scared of moths because in Malaysia, they're huge. And you just die without saying, oh, I want to live. Oh, why me? You know what I mean? And so finding out that I can't say, God help me, or I'm going to have a reunion with David, I now accept that I've got to stand on my 2 feet and use my brain to deal with being alone, without being partnered, without doing what everybody says you should be doing, growing up, getting married, being happy, looking at the male gaze, being multitasked, all the kinds of signals that take us away from just being very simple, clear thinking, kind people. And it involves rigor. And so playing music involves rigor. Dancing involves rigor. Improvising in your life takes rigor, not just freedom. And that's what I meant, that you can understand the rules, but you have, if you understand the rules, you're permitted to break the rules, but you've got to understand there's a price to pay for asking for more than you need.
Dure, could you speak a little bit more about rigor and improvisation? Because there's a sense for many people that improvisation is just a process of letting go and
Yes.
of it doing whatever is to be done. But rigor that counterbalances, that creates, I think, a practice out of it,
yes,
is something else, isn't it?
Yes. You've got to calm yourself. It's scary because you're not reading what you're going to play, or what step you're going to take, or what way you're going to read that. And then you have to listen for the silence, find the place to move in, hear the sound. If you don't hear the sound, wait. I'm talking as a musician, right? Wait. Play the sound. If the first time you play it, that doesn't feel good, just repeat it so that you can even build it up to get the sound you want. Don't rush. There's no hurry. Take your time. And even if I only say 3 things, it doesn't matter. And I think now I don't play music without talking to the audience now. I just say what I'm doing, and now more and more people want to talk. More and more people want to ask you. They even say, "Where'd you buy that?" And I said, "In a Chinese shop, in a chemist shop, from my kitchen." And so you're sharing all the time. So people are starting to see, how did you collect them? And, so collect sounds around you that you like. Play with music with people who you know a bit about. And if you don't know a bit about, that's exciting. You're going to find out that they're going to give you sounds that you can fly with. uh, be careful about the quality of the sound that you use. Make sure that you love the sound of it, that it resonates with you. That all takes thinking through. Sometimes it comes quickly and sometimes it doesn't. So what? Find your own pace. If people want to play with you, they'll work to it too. And I've learned to be much more open to the fact that I'm learning from every musician I listen to, whether I'm listening to Mahler or I'm listening to three people that are in my house when we've decided to play music together. If I'm in a hotel room with some musicians, we might dismantle the whole room as part of our improvisation and then put it back together again and fall about laughing. But the important thing is, to me, now with technology, tape everything you do. Don't be drunk or stoned when you play, because the result is not going to be great. Record everything you do, listen to it, edit it if you need to, get rid of it if you need to, but be familiar with your sounds, be familiar with your licks. You can have licks to pull out when you're feeling like you don't know what you're going to play, and then move on from there. There are all kinds of ways of calming yourself to have a lovely time. And if you all open your eyes at the same time, or you keep your eyes open at the same time and finish together, then you are in sync. But you can play music with anything in your house. The same as you can open a fridge and you haven't bought all the ingredients, you can improvise cooking. What's so hard? There are basic ingredients and then you embellish. So I think that it's a principle that allows you to experiment. But I'm not one of those people who can experiment unless I'm engaged in some kind of play. It's playing, yeah. It's communicating, it's enjoying. So I feel very like, I think what's there to complain about? But we all have a narrative that's very dangerous to cover up for what we don't want to know about. Because the one thing about human beings is we do not want to know. I think that stands out for me. When I don't want to know, I can even have a tantrum like a 5-year-old. And that's what I'm trying to keep control. And I say to feminists, we've got to bridle our anger and bring men with us, because they need it. They've been told what they have to be and what they have to do, and we are taking it in by watching and embellishing this duty to be something else other than ourselves. And I suppose my aim now is at my age is to divest of mannerisms and habits that don't need to be there. Tidy up, clean up. So I'm taking 5 years at a time, and I'm enjoying being 78.
Wow, there's so much to ponder there. I was.
No, I think I just haven't been answering. I went for it. And I noticed that the other women did too in the podcast, your series.
I guess this is a kind of an improvised conversation, and
yes,
it's just the way it falls out, and there can be no mistake.
It's all a discovery. It's all inquiry. It's all quite nice for well-being.
Dure, you mentioned a word about life being an inquiry, and
yes,
and I do yes, and yes to that sort of that permanence of that inquiry. We're always on the verge of attending to what is next. Can we pull that back somehow to the process of improvising, or the practice of improvising? It feels like we can spark off on so many tangents now, because your reflections on life are so widespread and so deep in their way. But how might we just bring this back to improvisation, especially your practice of improvisation? Is there a way we can tie this back in at the moment?
Yes, I mean, there's a song in every sound, and a sound in every song. So I look if I'm playing to a song I have a few gigs with some lovely singers, and they have me there so that when you get in a stage where you're slitting your wrist, then it's time probably for something else. And if it's very syrupy, I'll take a serrated knife and run it on a piece of metal and get a sound that just balances sinking into treacle, you know. And when it's very high, but when it's very low, some amazing bells can just lift people's hearts without them ever knowing. And I still have a half beer keg, empty one, of course. And when contact mics came in, I put contact mics. This is 30 years ago when people thought I was lazy. I just high-powered, low energy drumming. I'm not a drummer. I don't keep time for anyone, but I'm going to for a couple of concerts because that's a good discipline. But I've got this half beer keg and I put the contact mic on it, and when I hit it with a soft mallet, it's like, or a hard mallet, it could be a huge cathedral bell. That's the beauty of technology. I don't think it's particularly funny to put contact mics on everything and have to have everything resonate, but to use it creatively. I sometimes cook and have the smells in the room and share the food. But I'll cut up a chicken and cook it and hand it out, and somebody's likely to has come up and said, "Why did you kill that possum?" I said, "I didn't kill a possum. I had a chicken there." Are you doing this because you're talking about cannibalism? I said, "No, I'm doing this because of the aroma being part of what we are doing." So I always have a ritual of some sort. I like rituals because it makes people think. They think she's not talking to us, she's doing something, so I'll watch it. Is she just filling time? And then, so I did a whole lot of things with eggs. And this weekend I've recovered it to do a concert where I'm actually going to work on eggs. So what I'm saying is that improvisation makes everything possible. It's exciting to completely strip a hotel room and then put it back again. And it can always be musical, and it can always, the sounds, if nobody plays an instrument, but everybody makes sounds with something, it's an orchestra. It's a trio, a quartet. Yeah.
While you were talking, I was thinking about fear, and as an improviser, as a person, fear is such a part of us. And it strikes me, listening to you, well, you certainly encourage me to be sort of braver in a way. There's a sort of a moving outwards. I would say you strike me as a person who is maybe acknowledged your own personal fears, perhaps, and just stepped out, and you step into the fear and embrace it and move forward. And I kind of feel like this is perhaps one of the things that is one of the qualities that's required for great improvisation, to step beyond yourself.
Well, oh yes, and I mean it's also hard for all of us to reach beyond ourselves. But I remember reading somewhere that courage was fear running in the right direction, and I like that. And I think you're right about fear. I feel fearful for myself, really. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? Because I always did the wrong thing when I was young. I thought life was to be like for me, and life was to have a good time and have everything. You can't. And so, in many ways, improvisation teaches you that, because you've got to face your own fear. Because people, I think, are lazy, or, as I said to you, on drugs, or preposterous, or all the words that people have for criticism. But I must say, there's too much going on technologically about this friggin' word like that they go tap, tap, tap on. So boring. And why do I keep sending texts where I'm being told they like that part of what I said? For Christ's sake, leave it alone. We don't have to like everything. But how do I know? I don't use technology to survive. I would like sometimes to leave my phone lost. There's no such thing as losing, as you know. Yeah.
I would like to keep talking forever, if we need to use the word "like" now. This is such a remarkable conversation. I wish we were all together in a hotel room where we could mess it up. And
maybe one day you can all just buy a big bowl of fruit and invite all the people that yabba dabba at you for hours.
But we do need to start to draw this to an end. It feels like it's been a wonderful, wide-ranging conversation, such a rich conversation, and one that we could tease out, I think.
Touches me in so many ways, and confirms so many things. So for me, this is a particularly special experience. Hearing someone able to boldly voice these things that are not often heard or attended to or thought about. So just a big thank you, really. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, you too. And may you have many, many more lovely experiences and challenging experiences and confirming experiences. I've had the full love and permission. Thank you.
Great. That's the end. And now we can all talk at the same time and it'll be fine.
Yeah. So if you ever see me in the street and I'm wandering around, say hello, please.
DURE, how wonderful it's been to chat to you. It feels like we could go on and really explore and discover and mine your wisdoms.
No, but I will be listening to you. I think somebody should interview the two of you about partnerships. No, not enough people challenge themselves to something that's consistently rigorous. Lovely.
Yeah, I love that. I love that comment. That's particularly pertinent in certain improvisation communities. That the thing about rigor. See, in the musical world, there has long been a sense of rigor.
Oh yes.
The orchestra and following the score because, and I suspect the rigor has developed because people need to play together.
Yes.
And they need to follow the time together. And in general,
otherwise it can't work.
It can just be a mess. Whereas in other forms of improvisation,
you can put yourself
less the case. So the notion of rigor, I think, is really, really important. So thanks for pressing on that.
And the big pressing in my life is the tendency to want to be lazy. And thank you for the journey, and thank you, gorgeous Jasmine. What a lovely name.
Great. And look, it doesn't sound like you have a lazy bone in your body.
Really? Well, neurosis drives. It's a driver. I have to pace myself, calm myself, steady myself. I'm totally out of control.
All right. Well,
great.
How about we stop it there? I'll stop the recording right now.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Wow.